Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to the Women's Show this beautiful afternoon. And we are coming from CCG offices. We want to thank you for joining us constantly. Today, we want to talk about climate change, climate action, and the different key asks that happened at COP26. I am cognizant of the fact that we are still in the 2-week period of the COP26 that ends on November 22nd. And different communities and different world leaders have come together, spoken what they had to say. Different climate change action actors came as well, and they had their asks on the tabled before different forums. And today we decided as women in Uganda to sit down and have this conversation on what climate change looks like for us, but then also what can we take away as we start to race around COP27, or even the different actions we will take along this next year. On my panel today, I have amazing ladies. At my far right, our personal moderator here at the Civic Space Women's Show, Maria Alesi. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Tricia. Good afternoon, viewers.
And next to Maria, we have Prisca again. She's a female youth leader in Moroto district. She's an author of Courage Under Fire. Thank you for coming to my
Thank you very much. Thank you, viewers.
And next to her is an amazing woman from Akina Mama of Afrika, Hellen. No, not Joanita, Najjuko, sorry. Joanita, okay. Najjuko, thank you for coming, Joan.
Thank you, everyone, and I'm happy to be here.
And next to her is an MD of an eco-friendly product and different products. She comes from Variate Care Products Ltd. Welcome to this panel, Hellen.
Thank you, Trish, and Good afternoon, viewers.
Good afternoon. And today we want to talk about the different things that speak to climate change. It's been hot. We've been saying that today. It's been hot. And maybe to set us off, I would want to hear, your different views around, what climate change is and why it's important for us to have this conversation, even before we set off. But I'll begin from your far end, Maria.
Thank you, Tricia. Climate change is basically long-term changes in weather patterns, temperatures because of changes in ocean currents, land surface, or ice sheets, right? Oftentimes we think that what happens in the Arctic Circle or the Antarctic Circle do not affect us because we are along the equator, without realizing like the world is an entire piece of things that must work together. So the shifts in one area will always affect what happens in the other area. So that's basically what climate change is.
Yeah, I think just to add on what Maria has said, you realize that the climate change effects affect every country. No one is immune from the effects of climate change. And so it's important that each and every one of us actually participates in this and is aware about this and is able to do something about it. So you realize climate change is a very serious factor, and if we're not aggressive about doing something about it, in 10 years, a few years from now, we shall be in poverty and have all these issues, which would have mitigated much earlier on.
John.
Yeah, so I like that the definition has already been given, but I would like to answer the part of why it's important to have this conversation, especially because I feel like Ugandans joke about everything. So even when things are happening, like we're saying, it's too hot, but people are not taking it as seriously as it should, and people don't even understand why this conversation is happening and why such big conferences and why people are really fighting for their lives. So I'd like to talk about the climate crisis, for example, in the Ugandan context. People don't know that about 30,000 Ugandans die yearly from poor air quality. If you look at our air quality in Uganda, we have one of the poorest air qualities. I remember there's a time when there was a lot of smog in Uganda, and I looked out for the Uganda Meteorological Department to put out something about why we have this smog, explaining to people why this is happening, but nothing like that came out. And at Akina Mama Afrika, our constituents and the young women that we work with don't even understand that climate change is happening and don't even think, like Maria said, that the crisis is something that they should care about. But yeah, I think this is an important conversation, like everyone has said, because it affects us, right? Like it affects each of us. And not only does it affect us, because us, we can continue living lives as we are, but there are people who are marginalized, there are people who are poor, there are people who are at the margins of society, who this is affecting really badly. We are talking about things like drought. People are starving. I think the latest report was saying about 2.7 billion people in the world are actually starving. So us, because you have breakfast, lunch, supper every day, you don't think that this is something that's affecting you, but this is something, like Maria said, over time it's changing, and over time it's going to affect each of us differently. And of course, we know that women and girls are obviously going to be disproportionately affected by it because of the existing inequalities that are already there.
And before I bring in Helen, you speak for something that I want us to touch on, especially to the fact that it is here with us. It's very easy to think, when we speak of fossil fuels and we speak of, hurricanes and we speak of wildfires, it almost feels like these things happen away, very far away, miles away. But then there are realities of mudslides. And then there are realities of, the cars we import, that are degenerating at our very watch. And these realities speak to, it is here with us. So what is at stake for us, especially us in Uganda here, when we speak of things of mudslides, when we think of images of, a lot of people say that the Victoria Lake is, increasing it, but does that speak to something that is changing in our pattern as well? I want to bring you in there. What's at stake for us?
Thank you. Going back to what climate change is first. We look at it in Africa. We look at it like it doesn't concern us. Usually, when people are, let's say you hear about COP26, people don't even care to find out what is COP26. Even when our leaders are going there, using government money, public funds to fly out and go there, you're not even trying to find out why are our leaders going there. But this shift started back then. These shifts were natural. But I want to put it into the viewer's mind that currently these shifts are because of human activities. They're no longer natural. They're because of us. And then as Africa, Maria mentioned it before, and she said we are poor. Africa is poor. Now imagine these big things are happening in countries that have money, but they're facing all these things. Now imagine it happened to Africa or in Uganda in particular. Now if you are not giving it attention as an African country, you're not thinking about climate change right now, just know that a few years from now, when the climate change starts hitting Africa, we won't even be allowed, I think, to even attend COP26 because we will be badly off. And as taking it to the part where we come in and how important it is to us, let's say as women, we are nation builders as women. And let us start from the grassroots to, as you're trying to, let's say if you ever get pregnant and you want to give birth, I think we should even make it a point to, the moment you give birth, you plant a tree. For every kid that you have, you plant a tree, like to show this kid that you're bringing into the world that climate change is born with you, so you're supposed to take it up to,
I remember one thing the Uganda Kingdom did is that if you take a girl from their place, you leave a tree as a reminder that there was a girl child that left this place. But that aside, it speaks to what we can then do, the small bits we can do. But I want us to go to COP26 as it happened. When before it happened, there was an ask for Uganda to put in their climate action plans, and 2 days to the deadline of us putting our climate action plans, it was still a work in progress. That is what the minister said. It's like it's a work in progress. We will get there, but it was 2 days to the deadline, and it speaks to what is then on the agenda that is tabled for what Uganda wants to do in regard to their nationally determined actions. So I want us to go to COP26, Maria. What what key conversations happened at COP26 that we need to look into? But then how do they affect us as women and girls in Uganda?
Okay, so COP26, basically, I think for me the most important thing that came out of COP26 was from the speech by the Prime Minister of Barbados. Before I say Barbados, Barbados, right? So Mia said, talked about like doing the things that we've been saying that we're going to do, because whether Uganda has an action plan documented or not, there are things that we know that we must do. Also because, listen, we're tired of nice documents, right? Climate change is not going to be reversed, or we won't be able to deal with the effects of it simply because our documents are well justified and written with great English and there's detailed research and all. Like that part is important, but I think we have passed that part of the discussion. Like if by now you don't have information about the way things are changing in your country, if you don't have structures to monitor that, then honestly you're really at the tail end of everything, right? So we've come to a point where we must actually do what needs to be done. And like Helen said, the debate of human activity is very important to think about, because climate change, like you said, things have always happened naturally. The ocean currents, the ice sheets melting and coming back, like not melting per se, but there are seasons. The world operates on seasons, right? So that used to happen naturally. But around the 1800s, and that comes with the advent of the industrial period, right? The industrial revolution, we see this change drastically. So today you have a situation where they're cutting down the Amazon because they're trying to graze cows for more meat production so that people can eat meat without thinking about the effect of that. We have a case in Uganda where the courts plus government connived against the citizens of Uganda to give the land of Bugoma forest to plant sugarcane. Like sugar makes you sick. Sugar is going to kill you, as a matter of fact, on top of everything else, right? So human behavior is very important to talk about. So in terms of structural changes, that must happen also, but in relation to what happened at COP26, I think it's time for us to rethink consumption and production, because that is the big problem that we have. So you're looking at fast fashion industry. The fashion industry is a big contributor to the chaos in the world. You're looking at the way we consume things, like people are trying to take everything, like inherent human greed is at the forefront of all of this. So we must rethink capitalism as we know it. Like, what are the things that are important? Do we need all the things that we see in the world? How much plastic are we producing and consuming? Like all of these things. It's even talking about having honest conversations about war. I know that at COP, big rich countries were contributing to financing. You see, what bores me about financing for climate change, right, is that the people who have the highest carbon emissions are sending money to Africa for us to plant trees, right? For me, that's the part that bores me, because it's also a very dishonest conversation. Earlier, we're having a conversation about carbon emissions and how people, okay, now because we count the one that goes into the air, people are now putting it into the earth. What does that mean for food production? And you talked about health. It's not just mental health, because climate change has a very big impact on people's mental health. It's also your physical health. We exist with a lot of stress because of the economic ramifications of issues like climate change, right? Even the fact that malnutrition is going to be on the increase, because if people can't produce food, you're going to have a crisis. And then, of course, that creates an opportunity for, again, people who consume a lot to produce GMOs and control food sovereignty, right? So now if someone is producing the seed and the fertilizer, your entire food chain is dependent on them as a person. So just to summarize, there are 4 key things that came out of the of COP26. So it was the issue of making carbon emissions come to zero, like net carbon emissions to zero. Then there's also the debate around adapting to protect our communities and natural habitats, right? So that speaks to our consumer behavior, but also you can't kick the batwa out of the forest in the name of conservation when they are the ones who have protected the forest for the longest time, right? There's also the debate to work together, but work together also means that we must have honest conversation on power relations, on production relations, that countries like America, China, Russia, like these people must have honest conversations about how they're damaging the climate situation, but how their action is more important for the reversal of these things. All the cars combined on the African continent do not produce enough carbon dioxide to ruin the ozone layer and climate as a collective. So when you focus on Africans, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do things and change our behavior, but even if we stayed not doing the things that we're doing as we are doing them, the world wouldn't look the way it looks right now, because the problem is on the other side of the continent. And of course, finally, it's about mobilizing money, right? But we must also think about, half of the time when we talk about money for this kind of change, people are giving us money they are willing to lose. So it's a situation of someone wants 2 million from me and I tell them, okay, take 100K, right? Or I make 50 billion and I give someone 3 million shillings. Like, that's money I'm willing to lose.
Yes. 3 billion for the Earth Fund.
Yes. So and you see, now the thing is, when he puts money into that pool, yes, that's important, but then it makes holding him accountable difficult, right? Yes. So yes. So
and I hear you, because what you said then is what someone was saying. Does it mean we are going to reach a point where climate financing then looks like it's another grant to bail out, poor countries? It's almost like as though we are giving money for aid.
But that's exactly what it is.
And I hear you there, because the fallacy is, when you have China and Russia missing at COP26, and you have, America still coming back to say, oh, we are working on our issues to deal with fossil fuels, even when there is, evidence of the fact that they're still investing in fossil fuels. How do we have that honest conversation? I want to bring you in here, Joanita. That honest conversation, especially we're coming out of a pandemic, and I love what Mia said. It's very hard for us to have this conversation after coming out of the pandemic, where we saw the vaccines was, a narrative of who gets here first and who gets the vaccine first. And in her argument is that it makes more sense if we are saying that we are going to do nationally determined contributions, if we are doing them as a collective, but not that Uganda will sit somewhere and think of what they're going to do for climate change. The actions of Uganda may not necessarily change the actions of the big emitters. How do we have that honest conversation on what different countries can contribute to climate action?
Thanks. Okay, so I have a lot of thought about the whole COP and the conference. And I've been seeing a lot of jokes going around that, oh, this is just like institutional therapy for rich countries, where they come to just feel good about, oh, I'm going to do this, and it's the same promises. We've had this is the 26th COP, but if you look at the science, it shows that from 1990, that is when the carbon emissions have actually been increasing the most, and from 2005, that's when they hit the highest. So why do we keep having these conferences? But I'd like to just pick up from where Maria said and contextualize this crisis, and like you've said, the COVID-19 pandemic. We cannot, as a feminist, I understand that there are systemic inequalities that exist. There are power structures, like Maria had said, that exist and continue pushing people who are already at the margins to continue pushing them out, right? So we look at who was invited to these sessions. I realized that the biggest delegate that was at COP were actually fossil fuel, the people who support it, right? Supporters of fossil fuel. Those people were welcomed. But then you look at us in Africa. I remember we wanted to go, but with the vaccine inequity issues, with things of even getting a visa, like everything was just so difficult, and they continued to push. So of course, if you're missing from these discussions and these conversations, then obviously your narratives are not going to be shared. We saw a picture of, I think, the first day of COP, and these were rich, old, white men. So, of course, they're not going to have the honest conversations. Of course, they're not going to talk about legacies of colonialism. They're not going to talk about neoliberalism. They're not going to talk about capitalism, because these are things that sustain them. These are things that make them richer. And I think one of the things that came out of that agreement, the draft agreement from this COP, was the issue of loss and damage. This is a key issue in climate justice, right? Where rich countries have to pay reparations to lower income countries, because they're the ones who have caused this crisis. But you look at the richer countries, they rejected this, and I think someone said that the 138 countries agreed to this, but in the final text, it was removed by just 3 superpowers, and that's UK, US, and the EU. So how, and these are the biggest emitters. So how can you even have these conversations in a space where it's the very people who are perpetrating this climate change? You see how they all came, and why they came this time actually was because of this whole fossil fuel conversation. They wanted to see, what are these people saying? We need the status quo to remain the same. And I actually saw a report yesterday, because they said, oh, net zero. So now the demand for coal and fossil fuel has actually risen. So these are things that, like, people need to contextualize all these things. Like, it's not just about, oh, plant trees, these false solutions that they keep giving us. Like, that's not enough. You need to look at the systemic and the reason why this crisis, the root causes, why it happened. And only then can we have these honest conversations. And I feel like it's only the young people who were actually left out, and they were on the streets. And they are the only ones who are having these honest conversations and saying, this is it, you guys are doing this. But
and Joanita, you said a nice point. The young people were in the streets, and they were calling out, I want to use the words of Greta Thunberg, blah, blah, blah. Stop this, blah, blah, blah. And show us. And then, our own Nakate said, show us the money. Like, enough of the talk. Show us the money that is going to do these things. But more than that talk, I want to speak to the women that cultivate the land. Because when we speak about climate change, I don't want us to, divorce it from the fact that there is also a female face somewhere there that benefits from the issues that are happening in our environment. And so the key issue is what, Wangari Maathai used to say, that you can't divorce environmental issues from poverty. How do we address for the women, because these things affect us, how do we address the key issues that are happening within our environment that weren't addressed at COP26, that can help the women that cultivate the land and also feed from it, even us as a community, because we feed from it as an agrarian society. I want to bring you in there.
Thank you very much. Part of those resolutions that they made, some of the things they said was that extractive industries have to be limited as well. I need to realize in Africa, we have wealth in the ground as opposed to other continents. And so that's already directly affecting us as Africans. And then that is where the women also come into play, because if you look at, for example, where I come from, my community of Karamoja, we have mining and we have people who depend on that for a day-to-day living. So if that is going to be bad, there won't be extractive mining happening, and that is going to be limited. It's going to affect these people. At the end of the day, the ones who are in the rural spaces. So that is now where we need to have advocates come in for the women and be able to share and stand for them and say our rights have to also be looked into, especially in regards to ownership of land and how we develop the land itself. So that is where women really need a lot of us, for example, who are maybe in these spaces, and those ones who are out there who have these opportunities to speak up for them and to stand ground and say, you know what, for the women, this has to be done to favor them as well, because you can't keep having the decisions being made in the favor of the other people, and then those who are down here are actually suffering the consequences. So that has to really come into play.
Helen, you own an eco-friendly business, and you're having this conversation in sustainability and the issues that you can address long term. How can we, constantly think about, producing for sustainable use? And how do we, push for the narrative of eco-friendly businesses? Even because I believe we are at the advent of our industrial revolution as Africa. I mean, different people are thinking of industrial parks. Even us here, we have industrial parks that are coming up, and we are pushing for production and the consumer narrative that we have. But then how do we produce for eco-friendly businesses, and how do we produce for sustainability? So while we are developing, we do not negate the environment.
Thank you. And we all can agree that we cannot talk about climate change without talking about sustainability. And as a producer of eco-friendly products, hair products currently, one of my best is shea butter. I want to take you to the African setting, and why I have a feeling the European countries just come, let's say, to COP26 or COP, any other COP that just for show.
Leisure.
For leisure, to come and witness, and they're like, what is Africa saying? What is Asia saying? Why? Because when you look at the African setting, we have everything that we need to remain as an eco-friendly continent, sustainably an eco-friendly continent. These people are going to come and they're like, Africa produces a lot of shea butter. Like you don't even need a lot of money because you grow it, you have it here in plenty. Now what are they going to come and do? They're going to come and ruin the market of shea butter here in Africa. They're going to come and bring out any substitute shea butter for any other wrong chemical.
Reminded me the conversation on importer.
Right? So at any I'm a hater of imperialism, and at any one moment these whites do not like us. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They do not like us, and they're going to always find a way of making whatever we have here unsustainable, not just for us, but even for anyone that is depending on Africa. So as Ugandans, first of all, I appreciate whoever had the concept of Bobo, buy Uganda, build Uganda. Before we even blame the whites for coming and doing whatever here, what are we doing as Africans? Are we really buying Uganda and building Uganda? Or you're going to look at my product, the African made or the Ugandan made, and you're like, made in Uganda? No.
I will use CeraVe.
Yeah, I will use CeraVe. I want Cetaphil. What is it? Then let me first compare. They only come to Ugandan products if, let's say, I don't have the money. The other one is still expensive. That then an African gets enough money to afford Cetaphil. My dear, you will not see him or her buying Variate Care Products. But this is still we need to have the confidence as the producers. Personally, I am supposed to build the confidence in my clients to the product that I'm producing. For example, if I sold to you my product, I have to make sure that it's really quality, so that really you will not have a reason. Any other reason will be because of imperialism and neocolonialism put in us. But I need to make sure that the product that I myself is giving you, the day you ever finish one bottle, you're willing to buy another. No, I'm not trying to compare what is Cetaphil bringing or what is CeraVe bringing. No, let me, as a producer, make sure that my product first is good for your consumption, and then it will be upon you to be like, no, really, yes, I want to support Uganda, but no. So let it be
something that we can then embrace as a collective.
Yes. If you know that you can, if let's say in Uganda, you know you can afford to go and look for shea butter from Lango region, go and get it from there. It's not for, but because at any one moment, if you're told that, let's say the US has the best shea butter, you're going to get a plane ticket and go there. But someone will be like, going to Lira for shea butter. And then Lira is far away from, let's say, the United States.
That's true.
Let's have this spirit of...
That's true. Yeah. Maria, let me bring you into this conversation. When we went into COP26, the Gambia had been on track in their 1.5, ambition. And coming out of Paris, still, that was the mandate they had to take, that when we go to Glasgow, we need to be able to have achieved at least 1.5 net zero. And only the Gambia managed to achieve that. So it speaks to what we can do as Africa. I want you to ride on that. I don't know what we did, but I want to ride on that. But I need you to tell us exactly, because I feel like we have this conversation and hope that in the geopolitics of this world, the US will one day wake up and decide this is what we are going to do, and we are doing it. And even if they were, the impact that they're doing is just that they will appease a few people, that maybe the environmental activists that are happening. But, what can then high-income countries do to change and ensure that the results in relation to climate change can be realized?
What can high-income countries do? Of course, like you said, if the US, if China, if Russia woke up and decided to do the right thing, then a lot of this problem will be solved. I feel like 50% of it will be solved. Then the other 50 is everybody else's contribution, right? So one of the things is that we've got to learn to see other people as people. I think that's like the beginning point, because the reason why, and even within these high income countries, they are high net worth people, right? So those high net worth people don't see the rest of us as people, by the way. You're either a factor of production or you are a consumer for their products, right? So one of the things that high income countries can do, and I think it's the responsibility, and this is where numbers is very important for building a power system, is that lower income, middle and lower income countries and communities should do the work of pushback, right?
Yeah.
Against the decisions of these countries. Of course, that sometimes comes with some of your presidents will disappear and things like that, right? So making hard decisions is also really, really tough in the world today. So I think, one, we need to start having honest conversations about rethinking wealth and what development is. I think the problem is what we measure wealth and development as, because you measure the growth of a country based on production and consumption. And that in itself is the problem. We also have to think, you were talking a little bit about extractives and how that affects society. But maybe we need to have an honest conversation about why are we going into the earth? Like these things we're getting out of the earth, do we need them? Because why are you getting gold out of the earth when we have a new form of currency that's working, right? What's the importance of titanium? What's the importance of these things that we are causing chaos on the earth? And when you think about it deeply, half of the things we aspire for really come from a poverty mindset where we are now trying to prove that we have arrived. And rightfully so, because it's trauma, you guys. Living in poverty does not in any way, it affects your dignity as a person. The other important thing, and Joey talked about it, is the discussion of reparation, but also the discussion of redistribution of wealth. People are not hungry in the world because there's no food. People are hungry in the world because food is located in specific areas. That's why during the pandemic, Honorable Margaret Muhanga was talking about how her bananas are rotting in the garden when there was a whole plethora of people in the city and outside the city who did not have food. So the problem is not that there is no food. The problem is food is located in specific areas. So redistribution of wealth as well is important to talk about, because again, how is it possible that the countries that are saying they don't want to do anything are also the richest countries, but also are going to give us peanuts at the end of the day, right? So the reparations conversation is one that must be had, because until people in the global south, until communities, politicians, and for me, I will call out politicians, because they're the ones who place themselves there as our saviors, right? Until they are willing to have the deep solidarity that demands that the global north, which entirely depends on us for its very existence, right? They depend on us for everything. Until we decide that we will not continue to give them this power. Me, I am for protesting, right? I am for blackouts. I am for Africans refusing to go to COP. I'm for Africans refusing. We must come to a point where if these conversations are going to happen, they're going to happen on the continent. Because on top of the fact that they're going to steal our money when we are applying for visas, we shouldn't go and spend our little money in their economy. So me, I am for pushback. I am for protest. I'm for, listen, white people and people in the global north cannot finish us if they are not willing to see us as people, because climate change is not just a thing about the planet. It's a racist conversation. It's rooted deeply in our colonial legacies. It's structured in the idea that Africans and South Americans and a group of Asians are not people. They are just tools for the richer, high net worth people to exist and achieve what it is that they want to achieve. So for me, borderline, we must go all out radical in protest. Yes.
And you reminded me of a conversation that happened. I think Prime Minister Mia said it, is that decisions were made at Paris, and the G7 and the G10 sit somewhere and then make counter decisions that don't speak to where we are going. And I think that is where then I want us to imagine that there ought to be solutions within Uganda or within Africa that we can make for ourselves. Given the fact that also there are other realities within Africa that the people in the north may never be, alive to. For example, you find now, come south
Tricia,
of the Sahara.
Say something about that. You see, these people know. I think we give them too much grace when we say they don't know. They actually know, and that's what's important to them, because you cannot take power from people when you do not know what it is that they have. So me, I will never extend grace to global leaders by saying they don't know the realities. They know that you're living in poverty. They know exactly why the poverty is caused. They know that the effects of climate change on your communities. They know exactly why it's happening, and it works in their interests. So me, I don't believe in the idea of they don't know our reality.
You said that because I believe that is what Prime Minister Mia said, that we might not even start to speak about the fact that we've experienced, I mean, the island had experienced, you know, a hurricane in 60, hadn't experienced one in 66 years, and recently they had one. And it's not that it's us at the front line doing the adverse things that are causing climate change, but that, you know, there are a few countries that, you know, are privy to the fact that the world will only exist if they stop or if they redress the things that they're doing. But in ensuring real results, what behavioral changes can we do as Africa? Because that's a conversation then we need to take home. What behavioral changes can we do as a continent, but then also as a country? That is what I want, because it should be as much inward looking as it is outward looking.
Firstly, I think we need to think about sustainable consumption and production. The things we're going to be consuming as Ugandans, as Africans, is there sustainability in these things? Are we able to make sure that production happens time and again? Do we have the raw materials? Do we have everything that we need in the chain of production to ensure that our production is actually sustained over time and is actually friendly to the environment? Secondly, I think we need to think about creating awareness. Yes, you see, information is power. And not very many people. Earlier on, we were discussing about how many people think this is a very far-off concept, but how do we bring this home? How do we go back to our indigenous communities, okay? In our churches, in our workplaces, in hospitals, in all these social amenities that are around us? How do we bring in the conversation of climate as a reality and bring in the things that Maria has been speaking about very strongly, that these are the things that are distracting us from the right course? If people have this information and knowledge in Africa, we can be able to, it can influence us in the right direction to make a better decision and to be able to take action in our favor. So we have to give information as much as possible, create awareness, publicize this, and speak about this time and again, day and night, till it sinks in, and we're able to rise up and say, you know what, enough of this, we want this done. Yes.
John, and I want to speak to what then, apart from planting trees, because I'm really against planting trees.
Same.
Like, I don't know why they would advocate for planting trees, but apart from planting trees, because
like it's
the truth is you fly above Uganda and it's evergreen. So I don't want to imagine that our solutions will come from planting trees. But apart from planting trees, what then can we adopt? And I know Maria spoke to the issues of, you know, wealth sharing and, you know, making sure that even means of production are equitably shared, but then even ownership of land is not you know chopped up into small pockets of people and influence. What can then we adopt as first, as even just women? What then can we adopt to push for in this climate change conversation?
Okay, so I still feel like this crisis cannot be separated from all the other structures of oppression, right? So things to do with patriarchy, because there is where you see that men hold more power than women. So that's where you see issues that directly affect women. So we can't talk about this crisis without still talking about legacies of colonialism and how this came up. But to situate it back to us, I think firstly is in terms of as feminists, one of the tools that that feminism gives us is an intersectional frame of analysis, right? So through that intersectional frame of analysis, you know that you have to understand that these particular identities and people are affected differently. So when we talk about women, for example, I'll give an example. People are asking why is this like why is it becoming a women's issue? If people are losing their sources of production and livelihood, that means that we saw in Kenya right now, girls are being sold off into marriage, like because their families they don't have any means of livelihood, they don't have any means of sustenance.
I was listening to BBC and there was a community, I think in India, where a girl child is cut off from when they're young as babies to be taken off for marriage.
So we look at issues like that. You look at just the pandemic, what it caused, the teenage pregnancies. So we need to look at all these issues and how they affect different people. Then we also, I think it was Helen who talked about, indigenous knowledge, right? And indigenous solutions.
Yes.
So what is being fronted? Oh, net zero, we are going to do this. But like how they are invisibilizing and erasing African voices. That's the same way that indigenous knowledge is not being recognized. And yet these people have been able to sustain themselves despite the changing weather patterns. Despite they've been able to nourish their communities. So how can we tap into that? She was talking about her people in Karamoja. How can we be able to tap into that indigenous knowledge to then front it as actual solutions? Because technologies are not going to save us. We cannot choose the same things that brought us into this crisis
as the solution. Electricals to the solution.
Exactly. So we need to center these people's voices and these people's narratives as solutions to the problem. And maybe Maria was talking about politicians. Like, grow some, honestly, speak truth to power. Like, you know the problem. I know, you want to be rich, and of course that speaks to the global economic system that we are in. But you need to, there are some of these things that you need to block. For example, the GMO bill. Why would Uganda need GMOs with all the variety of plants and fruits that we have, right? Like, that's not something that's realistic. Why are you cutting forests to plant sugar cane? Like, there are things that it's even, I guess, common knowledge, honestly.
And you reach 30 and they tell you leave sugar alone.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's also that you need to block these things. And maybe lastly, that what I can speak to is, I know they keep saying, oh, at an individual level, I've been seeing this whole consumerist notion saying, oh, leave straws, do this, but that's not the problem, right? Africa emits, I think, less than 5% of the overall greenhouse emissions. So we need to, I guess, analyze and contextualize this issue for what it is and be honest, right? Don't go through corners and lie about what's happening. Speak truth to power. I really like the young people, and they were saying things as they were. Like, don't mince your words, because our lives are at stake, right? Our lives are at stake. And I remember someone was saying that these Western people are talking about their future children. But right now in Africa, children are dying. Children. So for us in the global south, it's something that's currently happening. So we don't have that luxury to wait for the future president, to wait for the future people. So why are old men dictating how the future is going to go when they're not even going to be there?
Let me bring in Helen there, because Maria said something that has, it just came, it's like a flash, that they know. And there was an image of a baby that I think was in Ethiopia, and a voucher was waiting for this child to die. It was a very famous image of what, and it was bought across the world as this is what Africa really is. But it speaks to the reality of the fact that they know what is happening, yet they ignore it. And that is why I want to bring in Helen. What then do we, in having this conversation, and lest we forget that they actually know, what do we speak to issues of when they speak of things of, let's now get electric vehicles, because it feels like it's such a consumerism strategy, because then there Elon Musk will get a lot of production of electric cars. When they speak to issues of climate financing, it's almost like then they're giving us tokens to let's emit as you plant trees. Okay, how do we like intertwine this conversation to make sense for us? Because now when you look at the solutions they've given, it doesn't really make sense. Even for net zero, pre-industrial area, we've not yet been industrialized. If we are, we have few small industries that are there, and they're not even producing a lot for market consumption outside Africa. So how do we have this make sense for us as Africa and even as Uganda?
Thank you. If we go back to the resolutions of COP26, it's called the Glasgow
Agreement.
I think Climate Act. And one of them was they agreed to phase down the production of coal instead of phase out, right? And what does that mean for Africa? You see, what they do is, for them, they look at what favors them, what favors them. So as long as the superpowers agree, let us phase down. Whatever affects the not phasing out is going to affect Africa. So Baganda have a saying whereby if let's say you are a princess and then me I'm a pauper, when they are telling you something, when they're advising you, Baganda say I am supposed to actually listen, even if they're not telling.
Say it in Luganda, I hear.
Say it in Luganda.
Let me try. Baba bulirira owa bobwe oba. Okay, like the king, when the king is telling the son, for you the one that just comes to, let's say,
the pauper.
Yeah, you're supposed to actually listen. Now, when you hear the superpowers phasing down, let's as Africa try to phase out. You know, let's try to reverse psychology them. You know, like if their interest is to phase down, let's try and phase out. We are tired of being their beggars, of being so. I really want us to intertwine the statements they make, like Maria said. These are just things on this. These are just nice documents coming out. Yeah. They will continue coming out on COP27, 28. We will have a better document looking. Till when? Yes, till when?
And still emit.
And still emit. Elon Musk will continue producing whatever is good for him. Yeah. But what are you doing as Wavamunu? Are you still bringing in the same cars? What are you going to do as Wavamunu to prevent Elon Musk from doing whatever he is doing?
Interesting. Yeah. As we close this conversation, because I want to bring this conversation to an end, but I want to end it on the future of COP. COP27 is happening, and it's happening in Africa. I'm now even worried of the planes that are coming. Yeah. Should we deny them visas as well? Yes. You know, those are conversations we need to have. Yeah. But into COP27 is going to happen in Cairo. What is our personal call to action? And I want all of us to have, you know, in 1 or 2 minutes, our personal call to action for our leaders, our parliamentarians, our politicians, the youth themselves, and even us as women. I'll begin with you, Maria.
Yes, I think first and foremost, Egypt should charge the same visa fee for for all the people coming from the north and all those countries that give us headache, thinking we're trying to come and take the pavers on their streets, and let all the Africans be able to access Cairo. As a mark of solidarity, and said yes, our voices must be heard. So let Africans be able to access Cairo. But for me, a call to action is really to politicians and people with influence in Africa, because you see, sometimes we place the burden on the woman in the village who's already tilling a difficult ground and over what, just making her increase the burdens she has to carry as a person. I think for me, it's leaders of middle income and low income countries to stand in solidarity with each other and to protest this idea of people just coming. And, you know, I will compare it to this Amalubara. So they tell a story about how a rat eats at you, right? It nibbles on your flesh, then it blows. And then it nibbles and it blows. So you don't realize that your flesh is going because they are blowing. So for us, what's happening is, like, the global north is nibbling at us and then blowing. And then we're like, oh, So I'm calling on politicians, political leaders, especially from low and middle income countries, please protest. It cannot just simply be agreeing to this. If it means walking out and letting them have their meeting by themselves as a collective of usually white old men, let them sit in that meeting, agree, so that history will know that you refused what happened. But also, it's for us on individual level. We can't end production, right? Because we need things, right? But it's for us to rethink whether we need as many things as we have, right? So, as speaking to alternatives, because some people sometimes say, oh, you guys are very much in the air. It's let's rethink discussions of production. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have hair products. I'm not saying that we shouldn't drive cars. I'm just saying that in your home, do you need 7 cars? Do you need to buy a new car every single year? Do you need to buy the latest iPhone? Because then you're contributing to climate problems in DRC, but also increasing child labor, because that's the actual problem in those communities. So for me, it's individual behavior change, but our leaders must develop the will and the muscle to do the difficult things, because that's what they claim when they come to us and come to that woman in the village to demand to ask her for her vote. Yes.
Prisca. Thank you very much. My call to action is also to the leaders. Please speak truth to authority. Whatever space you find yourself in and you have the power to do that, do your part. Do what you have to do, and it will be able to save very many people behind you and maybe generations ahead. So you either do that or we're going to perish. So leaders, you have a very big task. We'll all die, yes, but it matters how we are going to die. Yes, so all leaders, please, especially everyone who has potential to do something about this, do your part. Please save lives. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I'll start with stating that any solutions that do not speak to dismantling capitalism are just a dead end. So like Maria said, we need to radically and immediately rethink and reimagine the ways in which we live. Obviously, Maria has given examples, and I still feel like we cannot separate this discussion of climate change without talking about the other systems of oppression. So we are talking about the elderly, we are talking about persons with disability, we are talking about women, we are talking about girls. So in talking about climate change and offering all these solutions, we also need to dismantle the other systems of oppression, right? And just to say that to our leaders and whoever is in charge, that we don't have the luxury. I mean, we saw the IPCC report recently. We do not have the luxury and the niceties to keep going to these conferences and just talking nice things without actual action. So we need them to act now.
Thank you. So, like we said, COP27 is coming to Africa, Egypt, Cairo to be specific. Remember that Prime Minister that gave his speech in water? We need Egypt as a country to think about something like that. Like we need.
Let the conference be in the night.
We don't want them to have a beautiful conference in
No,
Egypt is
no sun.
Let them sit in that hotness. Let them
discussing climate.
Right? So let them sit in the hotness and let them know what is actually happening. Because once they come in and you make them sit in AC, they will think we are not. If we're not going to do that, of sitting in deserts, let us have those women attending, the women that are tilting dry land. Let them come with their hose. Let them come with their sweating faces. Let them know actually what climate change does to Africa or does to the actual person. I read somewhere, I think it was still in one of the documents that were circulating, and they were saying the frontliners are not even people affected. The frontliners that go and sit in Glasgow are not the ones being affected. It's the backliners that are being affected. These are people who have no input in the documents that are circulating in COPs. So let us have the actual people suffering be the ones that give opinions, show up. And Africa being the host of the COP27,
we really
need to make a difference.
It should be ours.
Yes, it should be ours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this conversation is one that is, dear to my heart because we are living these realities. In the words of Wangari Maathai, she said, you cannot protect the environment unless you empower people, you inform them, and you help them understand that these resources are their own and that they should protect them. I think that is a takeaway I want us to take from this. This is our home. And it will be very absurd that the most intelligent species in the world ends up homeless or even extinct. It will be a bluff. Who will write our history when we are extinct?
Maybe we need to get extinct.
But most probably we need to extinct so that someone else can come and take care of this land. But that aside, I want to thank you for joining us for this conversation this week. Please, continue the conversation in your spaces so that you understand the key issues that need to be, held and run with so that we change, the future of our life and also change our environments. I've been your host, Tricia Gloria Nabaye, and I'm glad that you joined us. Thank you.